From tuna noodle casserole with canned soup and crushed potato chips to ketchup-glazed meatloaf and pineapple upside-down cake with caramelized pineapple rings. These are the comforting grandma meals that defined the 1950s. But stay with me for Kelly's ham Jell-O salad, the bizarre gelatin dish that shocked dinner tables everywhere. 100. Meatloaf, ketchup-glazed. 1950s meatloaf started with a problem every grandmother had. Meat cost money. The loaf pan solved it. Beef, breadcrumbs, egg, and onion stretched 1 pound into 6 servings. That is why it opens this list. It was the plainest main dish of the decade. The ketchup glaze was not decoration. It sealed the top and kept the meat from drying out. Grandmothers spread it on with a spoon in the last 15 minutes of baking. The sugar turned dark and sticky. That crust was the part children fought over. Every family had a binder secret, and every family swore theirs was correct. Rationing had ended, but the habit of stretching meat did not end with it. The loaf pan was honest work. The next dish was not. It was ham hiding inside lime gelatin. 99. Kelly's ham Jell-O salad. Lime gelatin, chopped ham, mayonnaise, celery, poured into a ring mold and chill. That is the whole recipe. Grandmothers actually served it, and they served it proudly. Nobody was joking. This was company food. The mold went in the refrigerator overnight. Refrigerators were new, and a cold dish proved you owned one. Unmolding was the test. You dipped the mold in warm water, then flipped it onto a plate. Clean release and you had one. Collapse and the whole table watched it happen. Gelatin salads were not a mistake. They were a status symbol, bright and impossible to ignore. They also hid leftovers. Yesterday's ham became today's centerpiece, and nobody had to know. Ham and gelatin sounds like the strangest thing here. It is not. The next dish came from a laboratory. 98. Tuna noodle casserole. Canned tuna, egg noodles, a can of cream of mushroom soup, crushed potato chips on top. Almost every American grandmother made it. Almost none of them wrote it. The recipe came from a company. The Campbell Soup Test Kitchen developed it. Here is the number that explains the decade. 40% of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup ends up inside one casserole. Not this one, a different one. That casserole is number 1 on this list. The same test kitchen made both. Remember that. It changes what a grandma meal even means. Campbell's had made that soup since 1934. It was the first they sold as a sauce too. One can become the glue of American home cooking. Open it, stir it, bake it, done. The tuna casserole was fast. The next dish was slow, cold, and shaped like a cake. 97. Frosted sandwich loaf. Picture a layer cake. White frosting, smooth sides, sitting on a stand in the middle of the table. Now cut a slice. Inside is bread, egg salad, tuna, and ham. The frosting is cream cheese. It is the purest version of the era's favorite trick. Make plain food look like a celebration. The build was patient work. You cut the crusts off a white loaf and sliced it lengthwise. Each layer got a different filling. Egg salad, chicken salad, ham or chopped olive on the third. Then you stacked them, wrapped it tight, and chilled it for hours so it held its shape. The frosting was cream cheese thinned with milk until it spread like real icing. Guests always reacted the same way. They thought it was dessert. Then they tasted tuna. A sandwich pretending to be cake was theater. The next dish had none. Children feared it. 96. Liver and onions. Nothing here caused more arguments at the table. Liver was not a treat. Liver was a duty. Grandmothers believed in it. Liver was cheap, it was iron, and iron built strong children. You ate it, you did not negotiate. The onions were the mercy. Sliced thin, cooked slow in bacon fat until soft and gold. The liver took minutes. Too long and it went gray and tough as a shoe sole. Good cooks pulled it while still pink inside. Most children never tasted that version. There was a reason it stayed. Wartime habits carried into peacetime, and organ meat was thrifty protein. Women who cooked through rationing did not throw food away. They watched you finish it. Children hid liver in their napkins. The next dish they asked for, it was made of hot dogs. 95. Barbecued Frank Bake. Hot dogs split down the middle, standing in a baking dish. Sauce poured over, baked until the edges curled. This is the clearest proof that a grandma meal was whatever fed the table on a Tuesday. It was not fancy. It was a casserole made of frankfurters, and children loved it. The sauce was ketchup, brown sugar, vinegar, and mustard. Some added a splash of cola. Grandmothers scored the hot dogs so the sauce soaked in and the edges fanned out. Underneath went beans, or rice, or sliced potatoes. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was measured. Here is the decade's honesty. The post-war kitchen ran on cans and shortcuts, and nobody apologized. A woman with 4 children did not need a French sauce. She needed dinner by 6. Hot dogs were a Tuesday. The next dish was a Saturday night, and grandmothers set it on fire. 94. Mocha baked Alaska. Ice cream cake, a blanket of meringue, then into a hot oven, where the ice cream did not melt. Grandmothers made it at home, in ordinary kitchens, to end an ordinary dinner party. That is what makes the decade remarkable. Home cooks attempted restaurant tricks with a mixer and nerve. The science was the show. Beaten egg whites are full of air, and air conducts heat badly, so the meringue insulated the ice cream. The oven browned the outside, while the middle stayed frozen. The mocha version used coffee ice cream over chocolate cake. The bitterness cut the sugar. Everything depended on speed. The ice cream frozen hard. The meringue sealed to the plate. One gap in the heat found its way in. Then you carried a puddle to the table. A dessert that beat physics is hard to follow. The next was a tomato, and it wobbled. 93. Tomato aspic. Tomato juice, gelatin, celery, onion, a shake of Worcestershire. Chilled until it stood up like a red brick. It appeared at every luncheon, every bridge club, and every church potluck in America. Grandmothers thought it was elegant. Their grandchildren think it is a crime scene. The texture was the point in the problem. Firm enough to slice, soft enough to shiver. It came on a lettuce leaf with mayonnaise on top. White dollop on red gelatin was the signature. Some had shrimp suspended inside. Some had olives. The ambition never stopped at plain. Aspic was old, but the 50s gave it new life. Molded salads proved a hostess had arrived. The modern reaction is loud. Online these get called horrors, and people still cannot look away. Aspic was gelatin pretending to be a vegetable. The next was chicken pretending to be royalty. 92. Chicken a la king. Diced chicken in a cream sauce, with pimentos and green pepper, spooned over toast points or rice. This is what grandmothers made when somebody important was coming for lunch. It sounded French, it was not. It was leftovers with ambition. The sauce started with butter and flour cooked into a paste, then whisked with milk. Sherry went in at the end if there was sherry. If not, the chicken water did the job. The pimentos were the tell. Red strips from a jar turned a beige sauce into something designed. Toast points made it a lunch. A pastry shell made it a dinner. Rice made it Thursday. The same sauce changed rank depending on what sat underneath. That was the era's magic trick. It dressed leftovers in a tuxedo. The next dish put fruit under a broiler and called it a starter. 91. Broiled grapefruit. Half a grapefruit, brown sugar on top, sometimes a dot of butter, under the broiler until it bubbled. This is how a grandmother started a meal she wanted you to remember. 2 minutes of work, 100% occasion. The knife work came first. You ran a curved knife around each segment so it lifted out clean. Grandmothers who owned a real grapefruit knife guarded it. The serrated tip worked in seconds. Then the sugar went dark and glassy under the flame, while the fruit stayed cold and sharp. A maraschino cherry went in the center hole, always. It was not optional, and nobody knows why. That cherry was the decade in miniature. Bright, sweet from a jar, placed with total seriousness. Hot fruit was a strange way to open a meal. The next was a stranger way to close a Swedish one. 90. Swedish meatballs. Small meatballs of beef and pork, simmered in brown cream gravy, served with lingonberry jam. Americans took a Scandinavian dish and made it a potluck standard without asking. By 1955, a grandmother in Ohio made Swedish meatballs and had never met a Swede. The size was the rule. Small enough for one bite, rolled between wet palms so they stayed round. The secret was bread soaked in cream, not dry crumbs. It made the inside soft, not springy. Allspice and white pepper did the seasoning. That is why it tastes nothing like an Italian meatball. The gravy was built in the same pan. Flour into the brown bits, then stock and cream. The lingonberry jam confused everyone. Sweet fruit beside brown gravy sounds wrong. One bite ended it. Sweden gave America its meatball. The next dish was born in a can, and America gave it away. 89. Spam casserole. Canned meat, cubed and browned, folded into noodles or potatoes, baked with cheese until crisp. Spam sat in the pantry of nearly every American grandmother, and pantry food became dinner. There was no shame in it. There was a war behind it. Spam had fed soldiers across 2 oceans. When they came home, the can stayed, and so did the taste. Grandmothers scored the surface in a diamond pattern, so more of it caught color in the pan. That browning changed everything. From the can, it was soft and salty. Fried, it went almost sweet. Post-war abundance did not erase what scarcity had taught. It just added cheese. A woman who had counted ration points did not stop trusting a can that never spoiled. Spam was survival wearing an apron. The next dish was pure show, on a special plate. 88 deviled eggs, hard-boiled eggs halved. Yolks mashed with mayonnaise and mustard piped back in, dusted with paprika. No gathering happened without them. They are the potluck dish people remember first. Grandmothers owned a dedicated deviled egg plate. That plate had one job in life. The boil was where reputations were made. Too long and a green ring formed, and everyone saw it. Older eggs peeled clean. Fresh eggs fought back and took half the white with the shell. Grandmothers knew this. They bought eggs a week before the party and let them sit. The paprika was almost never for flavor. It was for the color, a red line across white. Some piped the filling through a star tip. Others spooned it in and let the fork marks show. Deviled eggs vanished in 10 minutes. The next dish needed a match first. 87, Cherries Jubilee. Dark cherries in syrup, warmed, splashed with brandy, set alight, poured flaming over vanilla ice cream. A 1950s grandmother would genuinely set fire to dessert in her own dining room. The lights went off. The flame went up. Somebody's aunt gasped every single time. The trick was warming the brandy first. Cold spirit does not catch, and you look foolish. You tilted the pan toward the flame. Blue fire ran across the surface in a sheet. It burned about 20 seconds, then died. The alcohol left. The cherry flavor got deeper. The cold ice cream was the point. Hot syrup hitting cold cream made a ribbon that seized. Timing was everything. Pour early and the flame was gone. Pour late and you had cherry soup. Fire at the table was peak confidence. The next dish had confidence in the name and nowhere else. 86, Salmon Casserole Surprise. Canned salmon, mixed with rice or noodles, bound with cream sauce, baked under a crumb topping. Canned fish was cheap protein, and grandmothers built whole dinners on it without blinking. The word surprise in the name was doing heavy work. Here is what nobody warned modern cooks about. Canned salmon came with the bones still in it. They were soft, edible, and full of calcium, and grandmothers mashed them into the mix on purpose. You never saw them, you just ate them. That was the surprise, and it was a feature. The topping was whatever was stale. Crackers, breadcrumbs, cornflakes, even potato chips. Butter went over the top so the crumbs browned instead of drying out. Hidden bones is a small surprise. The next dish had 7 colors and it took 2 days. 85. 7-layer gelatin salad. 7 layers of colored gelatin, poured one at a time, each one set before the next touched it. It is the most patient dish a grandmother ever made, and it was not even the main course. 2 days of work, 12 minutes of eating. The rule was brutal. Pour a warm layer onto a soft layer, and the colors bleed into brown. Each layer chilled until firm but still tacky. Then the next went on cool, never warm. That meant checking the refrigerator every 45 minutes for most of a weekend. Some layers were clear. Some had evaporated milk stirred in to go opaque. That made the stripes. Cut a slice and the whole rainbow stood on its edge. Stained glass that tasted like candy. 7 layers took 2 days for one photograph. The next took 20 minutes and lasted a month. 84. Copper pennies. Sliced carrots cooked just tender, marinated in tomato soup, vinegar, sugar, and oil with onion. This is what grandmothers made when they needed something that would keep and travel. The name came from the look. Round orange coins glowing in the bowl. The marinade was the whole idea. Sweet and sour at once, and it got better every day. You made it Wednesday for Sunday. By then the carrots had drunk the sauce without going to mush. Tomato soup as a dressing sounds wrong until you taste it. The sugar and vinegar balance it. Here is the era's logic in one bowl. The soup can was not a soup, it was an ingredient. Grandmothers used it as gravy, sauce, binder, and here as salad dressing. 1 can, 4 jobs. Carrots and tomato soup was thrift dressed up. The next dish was expensive on purpose. 83. Oysters. Rockefeller oysters on the half shell, topped with a green mixture of butter and herbs, baked on rock salt. Grandmothers made it for anniversaries, for New Year's Eve, for the nights that mattered. Nobody made this on a Tuesday. That was the point. The rock salt was not seasoning. It held the shells level so the topping did not slide off. It also held heat, so the oysters kept sizzling from the oven to the table. The green topping was guarded. Spinach in most homes, though the original reportedly used none. The exact original has stayed secret for over a century. Every version you have eaten is a guess. Grandmothers guessed with what they had. Parsley, celery leaves, green onion, a splash of anise. Oysters were a special night. The next dish turned Thursday's leftovers into an opera singer. 82. Turkey tetrazzini, leftover turkey, spaghetti, mushrooms, and cream sauce, baked under Parmesan until the edges bubbled. This is what happened to the bird on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. In every house, every year. Nothing was thrown out, not the meat, not the bones, not the fat. It was named for an opera singer, which is why grandmothers felt fancy serving reheated turkey. The stock came from the carcass. You boiled the bones for hours and that became the sauce. That is why the homemade version tasted deeper than the canned soup version. Sherry went in if there was sherry. Mushrooms went in because they made it look intentional. The spaghetti was undercooked on purpose. It kept cooking in the oven and would go soft. Tetrazzini was leftovers in a costume. The next dish sat in a glass and glowed. 81. Shrimp cocktail, cold cooked shrimp, hooked over the rim of a stemmed glass, with ketchup and horseradish below. This was the fanciest thing a 1950s grandmother could put before a guest. Frozen shrimp had arrived. Suddenly the coast came to Kansas. The glass mattered as much as the shrimp. A footed sherbet glass, chilled, lettuce in the bottom. The shrimp hung over the edge, by their tails, 6 of them arranged like a clock. Grandmothers cooked them with lemon and bay, then plunged them into ice so they snapped. The sauce was 2 things: ketchup for sweetness, horseradish for heat. The ratio was a fingerprint. Some added lemon, some added Worcestershire. Everyone claimed theirs was correct. Shrimp cocktail was cold and controlled. The next dish was impossible to control at all. 80. Lemon meringue pie, a pale filling, sharp and sweet, under a mountain of brown meringue, with dark tips on every peak. This was the pie a grandmother made to prove she could. It punished mistakes. Get one step wrong and the whole thing wept water onto the plate. The filling was thickened with cornstarch and yolks, stirred without stopping until it pulled clean. The lemon went in last, off the heat. Boil the juice and the flavor turns dull and flat. Then the meringue went on while the filling was hot. That heat cooked the underside and sealed it. Meringue on cold filling was the classic error. It slid, it wept, and a puddle formed. The peaks were pulled up with a spoon. Under the broiler, they browned in 90 seconds. Lemon meringue punished the careless. The next dish forgave everything. It was a vegetable holding dinner. 79. Stuffed peppers, green peppers, tops cut off, hollowed out, packed with beef and rice, baked standing in tomato sauce. The pepper was not a vegetable. It was a container, and containers stretched meat. Half a pound of beef fed 6 people. That was the arithmetic of the decade. The peppers got a quick boil first, so they softened enough to eat without going limp. Grandmothers cut a slice off the bottom so each stood upright. A pepper that tipped emptied itself. The filling was rarely raw. You browned the beef, cooked the rice, mixed them, then packed it in. Tomato sauce went in the dish, not just on top. It steamed the peppers from below. The last 10 minutes got cheese. It melted down the sides and glued each pepper to the dish. A pepper was an edible bowl. The next dish was a tropical drink in gelatin. 78. Pina colada, molded salad, crushed pineapple, coconut, cream cheese, and gelatin, chilled in a mold, served as a salad. This shows how far the decade would go. Dessert was now a side dish. Nobody blinked. It sat next to the roast. Fresh pineapple would have ruined it. Raw pineapple has an enzyme that eats protein, and gelatin is protein. Use fresh fruit and your mold never sets. It stays a sweet yellow soup in a fancy shape. Canned pineapple is heated during canning, and heat kills the enzyme. That is why recipes said canned. The coconut came shredded from a bag, another new product filling new supermarket shelves. Cream cheese made it cloudy and rich. Without it, the mold looked like a paperweight. Tropical gelatin was a fantasy. The next dish had none. It was potatoes and it was perfect. 77. Scalloped potatoes, thin potato slices layered in a dish, covered in milk, baked slow until the top browned. It went beside the ham, the roast, everything. At every Sunday dinner in America, no cheese. That is the rule people get wrong. Add cheese and it becomes a different dish. The slices had to be thin and even, about the thickness of a coin, or it cooked unevenly. Grandmothers with a mandolin were fast. Everyone else stood there with a paring knife. Flour got dusted between the layers. That flour thickened the milk into a sauce as it baked. The dish went in covered for the first hour, so the potatoes steamed and softened through. Then the cover came off, and the top spent 30 minutes turning gold and crisp at the corners. Scalloped potatoes were quiet and reliable. The next dish was served on toast at midnight. 76. Welsh rarebit, melted cheese, thickened with beer or milk, sharpened with mustard, poured hot over toast. This is what a grandmother made when there was no meal. Cheese on toast, elevated. The name has no rabbit in it. That confused children for a century. The sauce was not just melted cheese. Melt cheese alone, and it splits into string and grease. So you made a light sauce first, then added cheese slowly off the heat, stirring the whole time. Dry mustard and a shake of Worcestershire cut the fat. Without them, it was heavy and dull. The toast had to be thick and well browned. Thin toast collapsed into cheese soup. Some grandmothers ran it under the broiler, so the top blistered and spotted brown. Rarebit was supper for a house with nothing. The next dish took that idea and baked it. 75. Cheese sandwich casserole, whole cheese sandwiches laid in a dish, covered in eggs and milk, soaked, then baked until it puffed. This is the strangest logic here. Somebody looked at a sandwich and thought, bake that. And it worked. It came out like a savory bread pudding. The soak was the secret. The sandwiches sat in the egg and milk for an hour, sometimes overnight. Dry bread was better than fresh. Stale bread drinks the custard. Fresh bread turns to paste. It rose in the oven like a souffle, then settled as it cooled. Nobody minded the collapse. The top sandwiches went crisp and brown. The bottom one stayed soft and custardy. Both were correct. This was a make-ahead dish before that phrase existed. Built Saturday night, baked Sunday morning. A baked sandwich is odd. The next was odder. It was a pear pretending to be underwater. 74. Under the sea, pear salad, lime gelatin poured over canned pears and cream cheese, so the fruit seems to float in green. This is the decade's imagination at full volume. A salad designed to look like an ocean floor. The pears were the fish. The gelatin was the sea. Grandmothers said this with a straight face. The build was 2 stages. A clear lime layer went in first and chilled until firm. Then the pears got mashed with cream cheese, folded into a second batch, and poured on top. Unmolded, the cloudy layer sat underneath, and the clear layer stood above it like water. The pears had to be canned and drained hard. Wet fruit thinned the gelatin and the layers softened. Some grandmothers tinted the top with a drop of blue. Green plus blue made the sea look real. Under the sea was fantasy in a mold. The next dish was what every child on earth wanted. 73. Mac and cheese, baked elbow macaroni and cheese sauce, topped with crumbs, baked until it browned and bubbled. No child ever complained about this dish. Not once in the entire decade. The box version existed. Grandmothers used it. They also made it from scratch, and everyone knew. The scratch sauce started with butter and flour, then milk, then cheese added slowly off the heat. Sharp cheddar was the choice, grated from a block. Pre-shredded cheese was coated to stop clumping. That coating stops melting too. It is why some sauces went grainy instead of smooth. Dry mustard was the hidden ingredient. You could not taste it, but the cheese tasted more like cheese. The crumb topping was buttered and baked until the edges pulled away and went crunchy. Mac and cheese made everyone happy. The next entry made only the adults happy. 72. Old-fashioned. Sugar, bitters, whiskey, ice, and a twist of orange. Stirred in a short, heavy glass. Nothing else. The 1950s cocktail hour was part of the meal, not separate from it. Grandfather made the drinks. Grandmother made the dinner. That was the arrangement. The sugar cube went in with 2 dashes of bitters and a splash of water, then got crushed. That muddling had to be patient. Undissolved sugar sat at the bottom and the last sip was syrup. The whiskey went in over 1 large ice cube, because 1 big cube melts slower than 4 small ones. Then you stirred. You never shook it. Shaking put air in and made it cloudy. The orange peel got twisted over the glass, so the oil sprayed across the surface. The old-fashioned was made with precision. The next was made with whatever was left in the icebox. 71. Creamed tuna on toast. Canned tuna in a white sauce, ladled over toast, sometimes with peas or a chopped egg. It was Friday. Millions ate fish on Fridays, and this was the cheapest way to do it. 15 minutes, 4 ingredients, dinner. The white sauce was the whole skill. Butter and flour cooked a minute to lose the raw taste. Then milk went in slowly. Whisked hard or you got lumps you could never fix. Too much flour and it was paste. Too little and it ran off the toast and pooled. Peas went in for color. A chopped egg went in for weight. Neither was in the original idea. The toast went soggy in about 90 seconds. That was the texture you were eating for. Creamed tuna was Friday's duty. The next dish was Sunday's reward, and it was older than this list. 70. Ambrosia salad, orange segments and fresh coconut, layered in a bowl with sugar, chilled and served cold. This one is here because it did not belong to the decade. It arrived long before and outlived it. The name means food of the gods. It was 3 ingredients. The coconut came whole, and cracking one was an event. You drove a nail through the eyes and drained it. Then you baked it until the shell cracked, prized the meat out, and grated it by hand. That took an hour. It is why ambrosia was a holiday dish and never a Tuesday one. The oranges were peeled and the white pith stripped off every segment with fingertips. Pith is bitter. Leave it on and the sugar cannot save the bowl. Grandmothers took their time. Original ambrosia was patience and fruit. The next dish was Sunday itself, in a heavy pot. 69. Beef stew with mashed potatoes, cubes of beef browned hard, simmered for hours with carrots and onions until the meat fell apart. It used the cheap cut. The tough meat was the point, not the compromise. Time turned a cheap cut into a good one. Grandmothers had time. The browning came first, and it mattered more than anything else. Crowded meat steams and stays gray, so you browned it in batches, a few pieces at a time, and it took 20 minutes of standing there. Those brown bits stuck to the pot. A splash of liquid lifted them, and that was the flavor. Then it went low for 3 hours. The tissue in chuck melts to gelatin and thickens the pot. Rush it and the meat is tough. There is no shortcut. There has never been a shortcut. Stew rewarded patience. The next dish rewarded nothing. It had pineapple trapped in it. 68. Lime jello with pineapple, lime gelatin with canned crushed pineapple stirred through. Sometimes cottage cheese, chilled in a mold. It was the default. When a grandmother did not know what to bring, she brought this. Green, cold, bright, present at every table in the decade. Lime was not chosen for flavor. Green looked like a salad, and this needed to look like a salad. The pineapple had to be canned and drained. Fresh pineapple keeps gelatin from ever setting. Grandmothers did not know the science. They knew the rule, passed down and obeyed without question. Cottage cheese made it opaque and gave it something to chew. It also made it look savory. The mold was often a ring, so the hollow center could hold more fruit or a spoon of mayonnaise. Lime gelatin was the safe choice. The next dish smelled like a county fair. 67. Corn sausage casserole, canned corn, browned sausage, and a binder of eggs or cream, baked until it's set and browned. It is a whole meal in one pan, and one pan is what a tired grandmother wanted. Meat, starch, and vegetable together. No sides required. The sausage went in first, broken up and browned hard so the fat rendered and the edges crisp. That fat did not get poured off. It went into the mix because fat carried the flavor. Creamed corn was the usual choice over whole kernel. It brought its own thickness and bound the dish. Some versions added a cornbread layer on top so it baked into a crust. Corn on corn on corn. It came out puffed and golden and settled within minutes. You served it with a big spoon. Corn and sausage was farmhouse practicality. The next dish was vanity, and it was on fire again. 66. Grapefruit Alaska, half a grapefruit, topped with meringue, browned fast so the fruit underneath stayed cold and sharp. It is the same physics as the Big Baked Alaska, scaled down for a Tuesday. Grandmothers loved a trick they could repeat. This was the trick made small. The grapefruit got sectioned first, so the meringue did not have to be cut through later. Sometimes a spoon of sherbet went in the hollow. sometimes just sugar, sometimes a splash of sherry. The meringue had to seal down to the peel. Any gap in the heat crept in and warmed the fruit. Under a hot broiler it took 2 minutes. You did not walk away. You did not blink. The peaks went dark brown while the valleys stayed white. That contrast was the whole reward. Grapefruit Alaska was a small showpiece. The next dish was dinner in one skillet. 65. Skillet pork chops, bone in chops, browned in a heavy pan, then covered and cooked down with onions and a splash of liquid. The cast iron skillet was the busiest object in a 1950s kitchen. One pan, one burner, no oven. Dinner in half an hour. The pan had to be hot before the chops went in, hot enough that the fat shimmered. Then you did not move them, not for 4 minutes. Moving them early tore the crust off. Bone-in chops were cheaper and better. The bone slowed the cooking and kept that part juicy. After browning, the onions went in and cooked down in the fat until they nearly fell apart. A splash of liquid, a lid, and 10 minutes on low finished it. The steam did the rest. The skillet was honest iron. The next dish had vegetables floating in orange gelatin. 64. Carrot gelatin salad, orange gelatin with shredded raw carrots suspended inside, chilled in a mold and served cold. This is where the decade lost its balance. Vegetables in dessert gelatin, served as a salad. The logic was real. Carrots are orange. The gelatin is orange, therefore they belong together. The carrot had to be grated fine, on the small holes, or the pieces sank to the bottom. Timing was the trick. You waited until the gelatin thickened to the texture of egg white, then stirred. Added too early and everything sank. Too late and it sat on top in a stiff crust. Get it right and the shreds hung suspended, evenly spaced, glowing like something under glass. That suspension was the achievement, not the taste. The taste was raw carrot in sweet jelly. Carrots in gelatin was ambition without a break. The next dish was restraint itself. 63. Green beans, almondine green beans, cooked until just tender, tossed in butter with almonds toasted to a light brown. This is the side a grandmother made when the guests were worth the almonds. Almonds cost money. Almonds meant you mattered. The beans got a quick boil in salted water, then went straight into ice water to stop cooking. That shock kept them bright green. Skip it and they turned the dull olive color of a can. The almonds toasted in butter in a hot pan and went from pale to burnt in 15 seconds. You stood there and watched. You did not answer the phone while almonds were in the pan. Then the beans went back in the butter. A squeeze of lemon went over, and it hit the table hot. Green beans almondine was simple and expensive. The next was complicated and made of scraps. 62. Chicken croquettes, chopped chicken bound in a thick sauce, chilled, shaped, breaded, and fried until dark gold. It turned the last of the chicken into something that looked like it came from a restaurant. Nothing on the bird was wasted. Not the scraps, not the skin, not the last shred. The binding sauce had to be thick, almost a paste. Thin sauce and the croquette burst in the oil. Then it chilled for hours. A warm mixture cannot be shaped and falls apart in the fat. The breading was 3 stations. Flour, egg, crumbs. One hand wet and one hand dry. Mix your hands, and you built a glove of batter on your own fingers. Every grandmother learned that once. The cone shape was traditional and pointless, and everybody did it. It looked like effort. Croquettes were scraps in disguise. The next entry was 3 feet of coconut. 61. Coconut layer cake, 3 or 4 layers of white cake, covered in frosting, then buried under coconut on every surface. It was the birthday cake, the Easter cake, the church cake. The cake that meant something. Height was the point. A tall white cake said this house had eggs, sugar, butter, and thyme. The white came from using only egg whites, no yolks. That is why it was called a white cake. Those leftover yolks did not go in the bin. They became custard or curd or tomorrow's bread. The frosting was a boiled icing. Sugar syrup poured into beaten whites while the mixer ran. It set into a shell, crisp outside and marshmallow soft inside. It failed instantly in humid weather. The coconut went on while the frosting was tacky, pressed on by the handful, snowing over the counter. Coconut cake was the peak of her craft. The next entry was the peak of her nerve. 60. Perfection salad, lemon gelatin holding shredded cabbage, chopped celery, and strips of red pimento. Served cold. It makes the list because of the name. A grandmother called her cabbage jelly perfection. Nobody disagreed. You ate the cabbage jelly and you said it was lovely. The vinegar was the balance. Without it, this was lemon candy full of raw cabbage and unbearable. With it, the whole thing turned sharp and savory, closer to a slaw than a dessert. Grandmothers who skipped the vinegar produced the version their grandchildren still describe with horror. The cabbage had to be shredded fine and squeezed dry. Wet cabbage meant it never firmed. The pimento strips were laid in the bottom of the mold, so they showed on top after unmolding. Perfection was cabbage with an ego. The next dish was a pork chop and a can of soup. 59. Pork chops with rice and cream of mushroom soup. Pork chops laid over raw rice. A can of soup poured over, covered, and baked for an hour. This is the whole decade in one dish. The can did the cooking, 5 minutes of work. Then you walked away and lived your life. The rice went in raw, straight into the dish, and it absorbed the soup as everything baked. That is why the liquid measurement mattered. Too little and the rice stayed hard as gravel. Too much and you opened the oven to find pork chops floating in soup. The foil had to be sealed tight. The rice cooked in trapped steam, and a loose corner ruined it. The last 15 minutes the foil came off, so the chops browned and the rice went crisp. The soup can was a shortcut. The next dish sat in the oven for 8 hours. 58. Baked beans. Dried navy beans, soaked overnight, baked slow with molasses, brown sugar, and salt pork on top. It went to every picnic, every church supper, and every backyard cookout in the decade. The backyard barbecue arrived in the 1950s, and beans arrived with it. The soak was not optional. Dry beans that skip it cook unevenly and the skins burst first. Then they went into a heavy pot with a lid and stayed in a low oven for 6 to 8 hours. The molasses did more than sweeten. Its acid slowed the softening, so the beans held their shape. The salt pork sat on top and rendered down through the pot. Grandmothers scored it in a grid first. You checked the water every 2 hours. Beans that ran dry burned on and the smell lasted days. Baked beans took a whole day. The next entry took 90 seconds. 57. Manhattan rye whiskey, sweet vermouth, and a dash of bitters, stirred with ice. 1 cherry at the bottom. It was on the table before the food was. The cocktail hour was the warm-up. Grandmother had one. She said it was for her nerves. It was for her nerves. The ratio was 2 parts whiskey to 1 part vermouth, and that was fought over in every household. Rye was traditional and it mattered. Rye is spicy and dry, and it stands up to sweet vermouth. Bourbon made it rounder, which some grandmothers preferred and would never admit at a party. The vermouth had to be fresh. It is a wine, it goes off, and an open bottle sitting a year is ruined. Most homes never knew this. That is why so many Manhattans tasted faintly of vinegar. The Manhattan was a small ritual. The next entry fed 20 people from 1 bowl. 56. Banana pudding. Vanilla pudding layered with bananas and vanilla wafers, chilled until the wafers soften into cake. It was the potluck dish that never came home. The bowl came back empty every time. The whole dish depends on waiting. Made fresh, it is wrong. The wafers must sit for hours. They drink the moisture and turn from a hard cookie into a soft layer. Rush it to the table, and you get crunch where there should be cake. That is an impatient cook. The bananas were the timing problem. Cut them early and they brown, and brown bananas ruin the look. Grandmothers tossed the slices in pineapple juice or lemon juice, and the acid held the color. The meringue version went under the broiler. The whipped cream version stayed in the refrigerator. Banana pudding rewarded the wait. The next dish only appeared once a year. 55. Holiday spaghetti. Spaghetti baked with a meat and tomato sauce. Cheese folded through. More cheese melted across the top. It fed a houseful. When family came for the holidays, you did not fry 12 chops. You baked 1 enormous pan and let people fight over the corners. The pasta was cooked short of done because it kept cooking in the sauce for another 40 minutes. Grandmothers who boiled it properly first served mush, and they only made that mistake once. The sauce had to be looser than normal. The pasta drank liquid, and a thick sauce left a dry pan. Cheese went in 3 places. Stirred through, layered in the middle, and blanketed over the top. The middle layer was the secret. It melted into a seam, and every serving pulled a string. Holiday spaghetti was for the crowd. The next dish was for the photograph. 54. Bing cherry mold, dark sweet cherries suspended in cherry gelatin, often with cola or port poured in, chilled in a mold. This is the gelatin salad grandmothers made when they wanted it to look expensive. Dark red, glossy, almost black in the middle, it looked like jewelry. The cola version is real, and it is not a joke. The cola sharpened the sweetness and added spice. It also made the color deeper, closer to garnet than bright red, which was the intention. Some grandmothers used port instead. Those were the houses where children got no second slice. The cherries were canned and pitted, and had to be drained hard and patted dry before going in. Wet fruit sank. Dry fruit floated where you placed it, and placement was the art of a mold. The cherry mold was dark and glamorous. The next dish was pale, plain, and compulsory. 53. Creamed onions and peas, small whole onions and green peas in a white sauce. Warmed through, served beside the meat. It was the compulsory holiday side. Nobody requested it. Everybody made it. It sat on the table like furniture. Present, expected, and quietly ignored. The onions were pearl onions, and peeling them was a punishment. Each had a skin welded on. The trick was a 30-second boil, then cold water. The skin slipped off between two fingers. Grandmothers without the trick spent an hour at the sink with a paring knife, in a bad mood. The peas came frozen, and frozen peas were one of the decade's genuine gifts to the kitchen. They went in at the very end, just to warm. Cook a frozen pea and it turns gray and sad. Creamed onions were duty. The next dish was leftovers again, wearing the same tuxedo. 52. Turkey a la king, diced leftover turkey in a cream sauce with pimento, served over rice, toast, or pastry. After the holiday, the turkey did not stop. It became a second dish, then a third. Same sauce as its chicken cousin. Different bird, completely different flavor. Turkey is drier and stronger than chicken, and the sauce had to be looser to carry it. Grandmothers who used the chicken ratio ended up with a stiff paste and complaints. The dark meat went in too, and the dark meat is what made this better than the original. The stock was the difference. Turkey stock is deep and almost beefy, and it turned the sauce gold. A spoon of the pan drippings, saved in a jar in the icebox, went in as well. Nothing was discarded. Turkey a la king was the third life of one bird. The next entry barely existed. 51. Lemon chiffon pie. A lemon filling lightened with beaten whites and gelatin, chilled until it set into a cloud. Chiffon was the decade's obsession. Light, tall, and pale, the opposite of a heavy pie. The mixer made it possible. Beating whites by hand took 20 minutes and an arm. The base was a lemon curd cooked with gelatin, then cooled until it thickened but had not set. That window was narrow. Fold whites into a hot base and they melt, and the pie goes flat. Fold them into a set base and you get lumps of white and yellow, and it never smooths out. The folding was a technique, not a stir. You cut down through the middle and lifted, turning the bowl. Stir it and you knock the air out. All that beating, gone in 10 seconds of careless work. Chiffon was delicate. The next dish had biscuits sitting on top of it. 50. Retro ground beef casserole with biscuits, ground beef, and vegetables in a thick gravy, with canned biscuit dough dropped on top and baked. The refrigerated biscuit can was new, and grandmothers put it on everything. Pop the tube, drop the rounds, close the oven. Dinner had a roof. The filling had to be hot when the biscuits went on. Cold filling left the bottoms raw and pale. The biscuits could not touch each other. Crowded dough steams instead of browning, so they went on spaced apart, with gravy bubbling between them, and each one browned alone. The undersides were the reward. Gravy soaked up into the dough, half bread and half sauce. Grandmothers who baked it too long got hockey pucks. The window was 20 minutes and no more. Biscuits on beef was the can at its best. The next was the can at its strangest. 49. Tuna jello ring. Canned tuna, celery and mayonnaise folded into gelatin, set in a ring mold, served cold on lettuce. This is where the decade fully committed. Fish, in jelly, as a salad. And grandmothers served it at parties, in the daylight, to people they liked. The unflavored gelatin was the tell. This was not dessert gelatin repurposed by accident. That box of plain gelatin sat in every pantry, and it had no flavor at all. It was pure structure, which means every savory mold was intentional. Nobody was confused. Everybody meant to do this. The ring shape existed for a reason. The hollow center held more mayonnaise or a pile of olives, unmolded onto lettuce with a sprig of parsley. It looked, from a distance, almost like a cake. Tuna and jelly is the low point of the decade's judgment. The next dish restored it. 48. Honey ginger carrots. Sliced carrots cooked tender, then finished in butter with honey and ginger until they shone. This is proof the era could be gentle. Not everything was set in gelatin. 3 ingredients, 10 minutes. It outlived every mold on this list. The cut was on the bias, because an angled slice gives more surface for the glaze to cling to. Straight coins worked, but they rolled around the pan and the glaze slid off instead of sticking. The carrots cooked first in a little water, then the water boiled away before the butter went in. That dry pan was the secret. Butter and honey in water make a sauce. In a dry pan, a glaze. The ginger went in at the end, off the heat, because ground ginger turns bitter in a hot pan. Honey carrots were quiet and correct. The next dish caused a fight that lasted decades. 47. Spaghetti and meatballs. Americanized large meatballs simmered in a long-cooked tomato sauce, served on spaghetti with grated cheese. It did not exist in Italy. It was invented here, by immigrants who suddenly had meat. In Italy, meat was scarce. In America, meat was cheap, so the meatballs got bigger. The size was the giveaway. An Italian polpetta is small. The American version was the size of a fist. That was not a mistake. It was a statement. It said, we have arrived and we can afford this. The sauce cooked for hours and the meatballs finished in it, so each flavored the other. Browning them first was the argument that split families. Some browned, some dropped them in raw. Brown meatballs had a crust and more flavor. Raw ones were softer and gave more to the sauce. American spaghetti was immigration on a plate. The next entry was a cake made of air. 46. Cherry angel food cake. An angel food cake with maraschino cherries folded through. Baked in a tube pan, cooled upside down. It used a dozen egg whites and no butter at all. A cake made of foam. Then somebody added cherries. Because it was the 1950s and everything needed cherries. The pan could never be greased. Not once, not lightly. The batter had to grip the sides to climb. Grease the pan and the cake slides back down and comes out dense as a sponge. Cooling it upside down was the other rule. The cake collapses under its own weight while warm, so the tube pan got inverted over a bottle neck and hung there until it was completely cool. The cherries had to be dried and dusted with flour, or they sank straight through the foam. Angel food was engineering. The next dish was 3 cans and a bag of noodles. 45. Cheesy chicken noodle casserole. Chicken and egg noodles in a cheese and soup sauce, baked under a cracker topping until brown. This is what a grandmother made on a Wednesday when nobody asked what was for dinner. Chicken, noodles, cheese. There has never been a complaint filed against this dish. The noodles came out of the water 2 minutes early because the oven finished them in the sauce. Fully cooked noodles went a paste. Every grandmother learned this by ruining exactly 1 casserole. The cheese could not go in hot. Added to a boiling sauce, cheddar splits and oil floats on top, so the pan came off the heat and the cheese went in by the handful, stirred until it vanished. The topping was crushed crackers held with melted butter, crisp over a soft middle. Wednesday's casserole was easy. The next entry took 3 bowls and a very steady hand. 44. Crown Jewel gelatin. Dessert cubes of 3 colored gelatins suspended in a creamy white base, sliced to show the colors inside. It is the most beautiful thing a grandmother made out of a box. Stained glass you could eat. 3 days from start to slice. Nobody had to. Everybody wanted to. The 3 colored gelatins were made stiff, much stiffer than normal, then cut into cubes. Extra firm was essential. Normal cubes lose their edges the moment they meet a warm liquid. Then a 4th batch, white with evaporated milk, got cooled to room temperature before the cubes went in. 1 degree too warm and the edges bled, and the whole thing turned into a muddy pink brick. Poured over a crumb crust and chilled overnight. The cubes hung like colored glass in a window. Crown Jewel was patience made visible. The next dish took 4 minutes. 43. Coleslaw. Shredded cabbage and carrot in a dressing of mayonnaise, vinegar, and sugar. Chilled, served with everything. It went beside the fried chicken, the barbecue, the ham, and the sandwich. It never left. Every grandmother's version was different, and every grandmother's version was correct. The salt trick separated good slaw from watery slaw. You salted the cabbage and left it an hour. It wept a shocking amount of water. Then you squeezed it dry and the dressing stayed thick. Skip that and the bowl was full of pale liquid. By the time it reached the table, sugar was the second argument. Southern slaw was sweet. Northern slaw was sharp. Neither side gave ground. The cut mattered too. Chopped slaw held dressing. Shredded slaw was finer and went limp faster. Coleslaw was simple and endlessly argued. The next dish nobody argued about at all. 42. Chicken fricassee. Chicken browned lightly, simmered in its own liquid, finished with cream and egg yolk into a pale gravy. It is older than the decade, and grandmothers kept it alive. The Sunday chicken, not fried, not roasted, something in between and better than both. The browning here was different. You browned it lightly, barely, keeping the skin pale gold. Dark brown was wrong. A fricassee is supposed to be white, and hard browning turns the sauce muddy. Then it simmered under a lid for 40 minutes, cooking in its own steam and liquid. The finish was delicate. Egg yolks and cream, whisked, then warmed slowly with a ladle of hot broth. Pour cold yolks into a hot pot, and you get scrambled egg in your gravy. There is no recovering. Fricassee was old world care. The next entry was new world excess. 41. Cherry nut cake. A cake with chopped maraschino cherries and walnuts folded through, and cherry juice tinting the frosting pink. It used the jar. The maraschino cherry was everywhere in this decade, and this cake is why. Pink cake, red flecks, white frosting. It was a birthday in a pan. The cherries had to be drained, dried, chopped, then dusted in flour before going in. Wet cherries sank and left a soggy red band across the bottom of every slice. The juice never got thrown out. It went into the frosting a spoon at a time until the color was right. That is how a grandmother made pink frosting, before food coloring was in every cupboard. The walnuts got chopped by hand, uneven on purpose, so some bites had crunch and some did not. The cherry jar built a cake. The next entry came from a can that held a whole chicken. 40. Canned chicken and rice casserole. Canned chicken, rice, a can of soup and water stirred in one dish, and baked until the rice drank it. Canned chicken existed, and grandmothers used it. The pantry was the pantry. No thawing, no bones, no butchering. Open, drain, stir, bake. Canned chicken came packed in broth, and that broth went into the dish. Nobody poured it away. It was salty and thin, but it was chicken flavor for free, and free flavor was never refused. The meat was already cooked, so it went in near the end, or it shredded into nothing. Grandmothers who dumped it in at the start served rice with a memory of chicken in it. Frozen peas went in for color, and slivered almonds went on top if the house felt grand. Canned chicken was the shortcut. The next dish took a mold and a great deal of confidence. 39. Lime and cottage cheese. Mold lime gelatin with cottage cheese folded through, chilled in a mold and served on lettuce. It was the diet salad. Gelatin was sold as light and healthful, and cottage cheese doubled the claim. Green jelly and curds. A grandmother ate this and felt virtuous. The cottage cheese changed the texture. It made the mold cloudy, soft, and slightly grainy. That graininess is why people either loved this or spent 60 years telling stories about it. Small curd was the right choice. Large curd left white lumps that floated and looked like a mistake. The folding came late, after the gelatin thickened, or the curd sank and formed a white floor. Some grandmothers whipped the thickened gelatin first, which made it foamy and doubled its volume. Cottage cheese and lime was virtue in a mold. The next dish had no virtue at all. 38. Cream fried potatoes. Sliced potatoes fried in butter until browned, then finished with cream cooked down until it clung. This is the most indulgent side on the list. Butter, then cream, then more butter. Nobody in 1955 was counting anything. The potatoes went in raw and sliced thin, and the pan had to be wide enough for a single layer. Pile them up and they steam. Steamed potatoes go soft and gray and never brown after that, so you cook them in 2 batches if you had to. It took twice as long and it was worth it. The cream went in at the very end, a splash at a time, bubbling and thickening at the edges. The starch from the potatoes did the thickening. No flour needed. The potato thickened its own sauce. Cream fried potatoes were rich beyond reason. The next entry had a layer hidden inside. 37. Sour cream coffee cake. A soft cake baked with a cinnamon and nut mixture swirled through the middle and scattered on top. Coffee was social. The morning visit was an institution, and you did not host it empty-handed. A neighbor knocked. The cake was already made. That was the whole system. The sour cream was doing chemistry, not flavor. Its acid reacts with baking soda to make the cake rise. It also kept the crumb tender for days, which mattered when a cake had to last a week. The middle layer was the point. Half the batter, then the cinnamon mix, then the rest on top. That inner seam was the surprise. You cut a slice and a dark ribbon ran through it. The tube pan was standard. The hole let heat reach the center so the cake baked evenly. Coffee cake was for company. The next entry was pink and full of air. 36. Raspberry chiffon pie. Raspberry puree lightened with beaten whites and gelatin, chilled until it stood tall and pale pink. It looked like a cloud and took 10 minutes of oven time. Chiffon ruled the decade. Pink, tall, light. It was designed for a photograph before that was a thing. The raspberries had to be strained. Seeds ruin the texture, and a chiffon is nothing but texture. Grandmothers pushed the puree through a sieve with the back of a spoon for 10 patient minutes. What came through was thin, so it got cooked down first, or the pie never firmed at all. The color was natural and it faded. A pie made Saturday looked dull pink by Sunday afternoon. Some added a drop of coloring to hold it. The purists refused and served a grayish pie with pride. Raspberry chiffon was fragile beauty. The next dish was named after the sun. 35. Sunshine salad. Orange gelatin with grated carrot and crushed pineapple. Named for its color and served as a salad. It was the school lunch, the church supper, and the hospital tray. It was everywhere. Institutional food and grandmother's food were the same food in 1955. The name was marketing and it worked. Sunshine salad sounds like health. Orange jelly with carrot does not. Every element was chosen for the color. Orange gelatin, orange carrot, yellow pineapple, all pulling together. Nothing green, nothing red. The discipline of a single color scheme was taken seriously. The pineapple juice from the can replaced some of the water, which deepened the flavor and cost nothing. That is a trick worth keeping. The liquid in a can of fruit is free flavor. Sunshine salad was cheerful and strange. The next entry was an onion in a pie shell. 34. Onion pie. Sliced onions cooked slow until sweet, mixed with eggs and cream, poured into pastry and baked until set. It fed a family for almost nothing. Onions were the cheapest thing in the store. A quiche before America knew the word quiche. The onions had to be cooked down properly, and that took 40 minutes, not 10. Raw onion in the custard turned the pie sharp and watery. Cooked onion turned it sweet and gold. The pastry got blind baked first, weighted with dried beans, so the bottom did not go soggy. Those same beans lived in a jar and got reused for years. They were never eaten. They were pie equipment. Bacon went in when there was bacon. Cheese went in when there was cheese. The onions were always there. Onion pie was thrift as an art form. The next entry cost more and fit in one small glass. 33. Gimlet. Gin and lime cordial stirred with ice strained into a chilled glass. 2 ingredients and nothing else. It was the drink of the hostess. Sharp, clear, and finished in seconds. Grandmother made one while the roast rested. It was her 10 minutes. The lime cordial was the argument. A real gimlet uses sweetened cordial from a bottle, not fresh juice. Fresh juice makes a different drink. Brighter, more sour, and not a gimlet, whatever the menu says. Grandmothers who had the bottle used the bottle. It kept forever and it never varied. The ratio was traditionally half and half, which is far sweeter than anything served today. It got stirred until the glass frosted, then strained, so it was cold and clear with no dilution. The gimlet was 2 ingredients done exactly. The next was 10 done with love. 32. Orange layer cake. Layers of cake flavored with orange zest and juice, filled and frosted with an orange buttercream. Citrus was the flavor of optimism, bright sweet, and modern in a decade that loved all three. Orange meant sunshine, and sunshine meant California, and California meant the future. The zest carried the flavor, not the juice. Orange oil lives in the peel, and that oil is the smell. Grandmothers rubbed the zest into the sugar with their fingertips before anything else went in. That released the oil into the sugar and perfumed the entire cake. Juice alone just made it wet. The juice went into the frosting instead, a teaspoon at a time, until it took the color. Too much and the buttercream split into a curdled mess. That happened in every kitchen once. Orange cake was sunshine baked. The next entry was the can, shaped like a ham. 31. Spam loaf with pineapple glaze. Canned meat ground up, bound with egg and crumbs, baked in a loaf pan, glazed with pineapple and brown sugar. It was a ham for a house that could not buy a ham. The imitation was the point. Same shape, same glaze, same rings, 1/10 the price. The spam got ground or finely chopped, because whole cubes stayed separate and the loaf fell apart. Egg and crumbs bound it, exactly like a beef meatloaf. The technique transferred straight across. The pineapple rings went on top with a cherry pinned in each center by a whole clove. That clove was structural. Without it, the cherries rolled off and ended up at the bottom of the pan. Brown sugar and a spoon of pineapple juice made the glaze, and it caramelized into a sticky lacquer. Spam dressed as ham was clever and a little sad. The next entry was in everything. 30. Cream of celery soup. A pale soup of celery cooked soft in stock, pushed through a sieve, then finished with milk or cream. Half the casseroles on this list contain it. The soup can was infrastructure. Grandmothers rarely drank it. They poured it into things. The homemade version used the whole stalk, leaves included, because the leaves carry the most flavor. Those leaves usually got thrown away. Grandmothers who kept them made a better soup than anyone. A potato went in to thicken it. No flour, no roux, just a potato cooked soft and blended through. That is why the homemade version tasted clean, and the canned version tasted like flour and salt. The cream went in off the heat, because celery is acidic enough to curdle milk at a boil. Celery soup was a building block. The next entry is the meatloaf everybody argues about. 29. Oatmeal meatloaf. Ground beef bound with rolled oats instead of breadcrumbs, mixed with egg, onion, and milk. The oat version was its own thing, cheaper, softer, and it held moisture better. Grandmothers who used oats swore by oats. They did not consider it a substitute. The oats had to be old-fashioned rolled ones, not instant and not steel-cut. Instant oats dissolved and turned the loaf pasty. Steel-cut never softened and left hard specks. The milk soak came first. The oats sat in milk for 10 minutes and swelled before meeting the meat. Dry oats pulled moisture out of the beef instead of holding it in, and the loaf came out dry. That soaked oat mixture is why an oat loaf slices cleaner than a breadcrumb loaf ever does. Oats made the loaf soft. The next entry was butter and berries in a hard square. 28. Blueberry butter pastry squares. A butter pastry pressed into a pan, spread with blueberries, topped with more pastry, cut into squares. Squares traveled. A pie could not go to a potluck. A square could. You cut them in the pan, stacked them in a tin, and walked them down the street. The pastry was pressed, not rolled, which is why any grandmother could make it without a rolling pin. You dumped it in the pan and pushed it flat with your knuckles. 2 minutes and it never failed. The blueberries got tossed with cornstarch first. Without it, the juice ran and the bottom went to mush. The top layer was crumbled over rather than laid on, so steam escaped and the fruit did not boil. Cutting had to wait until it was cold. Warm squares fell apart into blueberry rubble. Squares were built to travel. The next entry sat under everything else on the plate. 27. Cornbread. Cornmeal, flour, egg, and buttermilk poured into a hot greased pan and baked until the top cracked. It went with the beans, the greens, the stew, and the chili. It never missed a meal. The skillet had to be hot before the batter went in. That was not a suggestion. You put the pan in the oven with the fat in it and waited until it smoked faintly before pouring. The batter hit the hot fat, and the bottom sealed instantly, and that seal became the crust. A cold pan produced a pale, soft bottom, and everyone at the table knew what had happened. The sugar question split the country in half. Southern grandmothers used none. Northern used a quarter cup. Both sides considered the other wrong in a way that felt personal. The argument is still live. Cornbread had a hot pan in a cold war. The next entry has never been defended since. 26. Shredded carrot and raisin lime mold. Lime gelatin with shredded carrot and raisin suspended inside, chilled in a mold, served as a salad. It is the strangest combination the decade produced. Green jelly, Orange carrot, black raisins. 3 colors that have never once worked together in any other context. The raisins had to be plumped first in hot water, or they drank the gelatin from around themselves. A dry raisin pulls liquid in and leaves a small soft crater in the set jelly. Plumped raisins sat still and stayed dark and glossy, suspended where you put them. The carrot and raisin combination came from a real salad, made with mayonnaise, and it worked there. Somebody looked at that salad and thought the missing ingredient was lime jelly. Carrots and raisins in lime was the far edge. The next entry pulled all the way back. 25. Buttered green beans. Green beans boiled or steamed until tender, drained, and tossed with butter, salt, and pepper. It was the everyday side, not the holiday version, the Tuesday version. No almonds, no soup, no fried onions, just a bean and some butter. Most grandmothers cooked them far longer than we do now, 20 minutes or more until fully soft. That was not ignorance, that was taste. A generation raised on canned beans expected soft beans. A crisp bean read as raw to a woman who had eaten canned vegetables for a decade. The butter went on hot beans in a hot pan, so it coated instead of sitting in a yellow pool. Salt went on last. Salt in the boiling water leached color, or so every grandmother believed. Buttered beans are as plain as this list gets. The next entry used crackers. 24. Cracker crumb meatloaf. Ground beef bound with crushed saltines, egg, and onion, pressed into a loaf pan and baked until firm. The cracker version was its own school of thought. Salty or firmer, and it's sliced clean. The crackers brought their own salt. That changed the whole seasoning of the loaf. The sleeve of saltines went into a bag and got crushed with a rolling pin, or a glass or a fist. The size of the crumb mattered. Fine crumbs disappeared. Coarse crumbs stayed as pockets of texture. Grandmothers who crushed to powder made a dense loaf. Those who left it rough made a lighter one. Crackers are already baked and dry, so they absorb liquid fast and hold it through a long bake. That is why a cracker loaf holds its shape, while a bread loaf slumps and needs a spatula. Crackers made the loaf firm. The next entry was cold, pink, and drunk through a straw. 23. Strawberry milkshake milk, vanilla ice cream, and strawberries, blended until thick and poured into a tall fluted glass. The blender was new, and grandmothers used it constantly. The appliance boom hit the kitchen hard. Push a button, make a soda fountain at home. That was genuinely thrilling. The ratio was the skill. Too much milk and it was pink water. Too much ice cream and the straw stood up. Grandmothers went by sight, adding milk a splash at a time, until it moved like slow paint. The ice cream had to soften on the counter for 5 minutes, or the blades just spun in a hole. Fresh strawberries made it better and paler. Syrup made it pinker, and children asked for the syrup. It went in a fluted glass with a straw and a long spoon, because the shake was too thick to drink. The blender made a treat. The next entry made a whole dinner from 2 cans. 22. Spam and scallop potato bake. Canned meat layered with sliced potatoes and a milk sauce. Baked slow under a lid, then browned. It married the 2 cheapest things in the house. Potatoes and a tin. 1 dish, $1, 6 people fed on a Thursday. The spam went in as thin slices, layered between the potatoes, not cubed and scattered through. Layering meant every serving got meat. Scattering meant somebody got potatoes and a grievance. The salt in the spam seasoned the entire dish, and grandmothers added none at all. Salt the potatoes as well, and the whole pan came out inedible. That happened to somebody's aunt. The lid stayed on an hour, so the potatoes softened in steam, then came off to brown. Spam and potatoes was Thursday economics. The next entry was Sunday theater. 21. Seafoam salad, lime gelatin whipped with cream cheese, and canned pears until it turns pale, foamy, and mint green. It is here for the texture. It was not jelly. It was mousse, and it was completely opaque. Pale green foam in the shape of a wreath. It looked like nothing else on the table. The whipping was the technique. You waited until the gelatin thickened to raw egg white, then beat hard. Beat too early and you whipped water. Beat too late and you smashed a set jelly into green gravel. The window was about 15 minutes long, and grandmothers checked it with a fingertip. Beaten correctly, it doubled in volume, went pale, and held soft peaks like whipped cream. The cream cheese went in during the beating, in small pieces, and it held the foam overnight. Seafoam was gelatin at its most ambitious. The next entry was made every week. 20. Date and nut bread. A dark, dense loaf of dates and walnuts baked in a pan, sliced thin, often spread with cream cheese. It kept, a quick bread lasted a week, and traveled to anyone who needed feeding. New baby, funeral, new neighbor. This loaf answered every one of them. The dates had to be soaked first, in boiling water, with baking soda stirred in and left to stand. That soda softened the dates almost to a paste and turned the whole loaf dark brown. Skip the soak and you got hard nuggets in a pale loaf. The soak was the entire recipe. Some grandmothers baked it in a coffee can, so the loaf came out round and sliced into circles. Those cans got washed and reused for years, and every kitchen had a shelf of them waiting. Date bread was built to be given away. The next entry rebuilt something much older. 19. Ambrosia with marshmallows and sour cream. The 1950s rebuilt the old dish. Marshmallows went in, sour cream went in, cans replaced fresh fruit. It shows exactly what the decade did to food it inherited. It added the new products. An hour of cracking coconut became 4 minutes with a bag and a can opener. Miniature marshmallows had just reached the shelves. Before that, you cut big ones with scissors dipped in sugar. They did not stay marshmallows. Overnight in the bowl, they dissolved at the edges and thickened everything. That was the trick nobody explained. The marshmallow was not a filling, it was a thickener. Sour cream was the counterweight. Without it, the bowl tasted like candy and nobody managed a second spoon. The tang cut the sugar and gave it a savory edge that let it pass as a salad. Marshmallows rebuilt an old dish. The next entry put them somewhere far more controversial. 18. Sweet potato casserole with marshmallows. Mashed sweet potatoes, sweetened and spiced, covered in marshmallows and baked until the top browned. It started a war that has never ended. Marshmallows on a vegetable, served with dinner. Half of America thinks it is tradition. The other half thinks it is a dessert that snuck onto the plate. The marshmallows went on for the last 10 minutes only. Longer, and they burned black onto the dish. They also had to go on a hot casserole. Cold potato meant they melted before they browned. Grandmothers watched the oven door for those 10 minutes. This was not a step you walked away from. The potatoes got baked first, not boiled, because boiling waterlogged them, and the casserole went loose. Baked sweet potatoes concentrate their own sugar. The good version needed almost no added sugar. Marshmallows on potatoes split the country. The next entry united it. 17. Bacon-wrapped meatloaf. A meatloaf wrapped in bacon before baking, so the bacon crisps and the fat runs down into the meat. It is the best version. The bacon did 3 jobs at once, and grandmothers knew it. It seasoned, it basted, it held the loaf together. The strips went on overlapping, laid across the top, and tucked under the sides like a blanket. Overlap was the rule. Bacon shrinks, and strips laid edge to edge pull apart and leave gaps. The loaf came out of the pan onto a sheet, because a loaf pan traps fat and the bacon boils. That one change is the difference between crisp bacon and pale wet strips lying on top. The rendered fat ran down the sides and basted the whole loaf as it baked. Nothing else does that. Bacon made the loaf better. The next entry had a crumb top an inch thick. 16. Cinnamon streusel coffee cake. A soft cake under a thick layer of streusel made from butter, flour, brown sugar, and cinnamon. The topping was the point. The cake underneath was just a delivery system. Grandmothers made the streusel twice as thick as any recipe said. Nobody complained. The butter had to be cold and cut in, not melted, or the topping turned into a flat sugary sheet. You rubbed it between your fingers until it looked like coarse gravel, with lumps of different sizes. Those uneven lumps were the goal. Even crumbs baked into a crust. Uneven crumbs baked into texture. Too much handling warmed the butter, and it went a paste. So grandmothers worked fast and stopped early. The batter had to be thick enough to hold the weight or the streusel sank straight through. Streusel was a morning ritual. The next entry was an afternoon dare. 15. Cucumber lime mold lime gelatin with grated cucumber and onion chilled in a mold and served cold as a salad. This is where the gelatin story ends. Cucumber in lime jelly as a salad. There was nowhere left to go after this. The cucumber had to be grated and squeezed hard in a cloth until it gave up nearly all its water. A cucumber is mostly water. Put it in unsqueezed and the mold never sets or it weeps on the plate. Grandmothers who squeezed properly got a firm green mold. The ones who did not served a puddle. The onion was grated too, not chopped, so it left only a sharp savory background. Seeded cucumber was better than whole. The seeds carried the most water and the least flavor. Cucumber and lime was the last frontier. The next entry pulled back to the farmhouse table. 14. Corn pudding: corn, eggs, milk, and a little sugar baked slow until it sets between a custard and a cake. It appeared at every holiday table in the middle of the country. The quiet essential, not a casserole, not a side. A pudding, and it wobbled when you carried it. The oven had to be low because a custard cooked hot will curdle and weep. Some grandmothers set the dish inside a pan of hot water which held the heat steady and gentle. That water bath is why the good version was silky and the rushed version was full of holes. Creamed corn and whole kernels went in together. The creamed gave body, the kernels gave a bite. It was done when the middle still trembled. A firm center meant it would go rubbery cooling. Corn pudding was gentle. The next entry appeared when the fruit bowl went too far. 13. Banana bread: overripe bananas mashed into a batter with flour, sugar, egg, and butter, baked into a loaf. It was never planned, it was a rescue. The bananas went black and the loaf appeared. Nothing in that kitchen was thrown away. Not even fruit that had already given up. The blacker the banana, the better the bread, and that is not folklore. Starch converts to sugar as it ripens. A yellow banana makes a bland loaf. A black one makes a sweet, moist one and needs less sugar. Grandmothers kept a bag of black bananas in the freezer, waiting until there were enough for a loaf. The batter had to be barely mixed. Stir it smooth and the gluten develops and the loaf goes tough. Lumps in the bowl were correct. Every grandmother said the same thing: stop stirring. It is done. Banana bread rescued the fruit bowl. The next entry rescued the chicken inside a mold. 12. Jellied chicken loaf: cooked chicken set in a savory gelatin made from its own stock, chilled, then sliced cold and served. It is the most misunderstood dish here. The stock set itself. Boil a chicken carcass long enough, and the liquid turns to jelly when it cools. That is collagen, which means this dish is older than boxed gelatin. Grandmothers had done it for generations. The 1950s version just added the packet, because a box was faster than boiling bones all day. That is the whole story of the decade. An old technique replaced by a product and nobody noticed. The loaf pan got lined with sliced egg or pimento, so the pattern showed when it was unmolded. It sliced clean and cold, and it went on a summer table where nobody wanted to light an oven. Jellied chicken was old knowledge in a new box. The next entry no box ever replaced. 11. Parker House rolls. Soft yeast rolls, folded in half before baking, so they split open and pull apart in two buttery halves. A grandmother who made these was showing off, and everybody at the table knew it. Yeast takes time. Time is the one thing you cannot buy from a can. The fold was the whole identity. You cut circles, pressed a crease off-center and folded it over. That off-center crease is why the top half is bigger. It puffs over the bottom and creates the lip. Butter went in the crease before folding. As it baked, that butter melted and steamed the seam open. The rolls were placed close together in the pan, touching, so they rose upward instead of outward. That is why the sides are pale and soft, while the tops go golden. They protected each other. Parker House rolls took all afternoon. The next entry starts the last 10. 10. Chicken pot pie. Chicken, carrots, peas, and onion in a thick gravy, sealed under pastry and baked until deep gold. It opens the final 10, because it is the whole Sunday dinner sealed inside one crust. Meat, vegetable, gravy, and bread. One dish, one fork, nothing left over. The filling had to be cold when the crust went on. Hot filling melts the butter in the pastry. Melted butter means no steam. No steam means no layers. The crust bakes flat and greasy, so grandmothers made the filling the day before and let it set overnight in the icebox. The vent holes were not decoration. Steam has to escape or it lifts the crust and collapses it. Some cut a leaf shape. Some just stabbed it 4 times with a knife. Both worked exactly the same. Pot pie was Sunday in a dish. The next entry was on the table in 20 minutes. 9. Buttermilk biscuits. Flour, fat, and buttermilk, cut together and barely mixed, patted out and baked hot and fast. A good biscuit is the hardest easy thing in cooking. 4 ingredients and no forgiveness. Grandmothers made these without measuring. That is not charm. That is 10,000 repetitions. The fat had to be cold and the hands quick. Warm fat melts into the flour and the biscuit goes dense. The buttermilk was doing chemistry. Its acid meets the soda and makes the gas that lifts the biscuit. Regular milk in the same recipe produces a flat, pale disc. The acid is not optional. You never twisted the cutter. A twist seals the edge and the biscuit rises crooked or not at all. Straight down, straight up. The scraps got patted together once, never needed. Biscuits were a test of hands. The next entry fed a family for 2 days. 8. Chicken and dumplings. A whole chicken simmered until it falls apart. Then dumplings dropped in and steamed under a lid. This is what a grandmother made when somebody was sick, or sad, or coming home. The cure for everything. 1 old bird, 2 days of eating, no waste at all. The lid could not come off. Not once. Dumplings cook in trapped steam, and escaped steam is failure. Grandmothers taped the lid down in some houses. In others, they simply told the children not to touch it. 20 minutes, no peeking, that was the entire skill. There were 2 schools and they did not speak. Drop dumplings were soft and round. Rolled ones were flat. Southern kitchens rolled them and cut them into strips. Northern kitchens dropped them by the spoon. Chicken and dumplings was comfort itself. The next entry had an argument baked into the crust. 7. Apple pie with cheddar crust. An apple pie with sharp cheddar grated into the pastry, or melted over the top, served warm. It divides people instantly. Cheese on apple pie is either obvious or offensive. There is no third position. Ask anyone over 70 and watch their face. The cheese in the crust was not a garnish. It replaced part of the fat, and cheddar is a third fat. That fat made the pastry short and crumbly, and the salt seasoned it from the inside out. You could not taste cheese in the finished crust. You could only taste that something was better. The apples had to be firm and tart, because a soft, sweet apple collapses and leaves a gap under the lid. Grandmothers mixed 2 kinds on purpose, one to hold its shape, one to break down into sauce. Cheddar and apple was a family argument. The next entry ended all arguments. 6. Mom's roast beef. A large cut of beef, seasoned simply, roasted slow, rested, and carved at the table with a pink center. It was the meal that meant something had happened. A birthday, a visit, a Sunday that counted. Beef was expensive. A roast on the table was a statement about the week you had. The rest was the part everyone skipped and nobody should have. 20 minutes on the board. Carve it hot and the juice runs onto the board, and the meat goes gray and dry within minutes. Rest it and the juice settles back into the muscle. Same roast, completely different meal. The drippings went into the gravy, every drop, scraped up with a wooden spoon and a splash of water. Grandmothers kept a jar of beef fat in the icebox door. It went into the potatoes and next week's stew. The roast was the centerpiece. The next entry was flipped upside down at the table. 5. Pineapple upside down cake. Pineapple rings and cherries laid in butter and brown sugar. Batter poured over, then flipped after baking. It is a magic trick you can eat. You build it wrong on purpose and it comes out right. The bottom becomes the top. Children watched this happen and never forgot it. The skillet was the original pan. Cast iron holds heat, and that heat caramelized the sugar into the fruit. The butter and brown sugar went in first, melted together right in the pan before the fruit was laid. That arrangement was the only art. Rings in a circle, a cherry in every hole, one attempt at it. The flip had to happen within 5 minutes. Too soon and the cake is fragile. Too late and the sugar glues. Grandmothers put the plate on top, took a breath, and turned it over in one movement. Upside down cake was a performance. The next entry came out of a paper bag. 4. Fried chicken. Chicken dredged in seasoned flour and fried in a heavy skillet until the crust is deep brown. It was the Sunday meal. Church, then chicken. That was the whole day every week. Cold fried chicken in a shoebox went on the road trip. It was the first American travel food. The bag was the method. Flour and seasoning in a paper sack, chicken in, fold the top and shake. It coated every piece evenly with no lumps and no bowl to wash. Grandmothers used the bag from the store. Then it rested. 15 minutes on a rack so the flour hydrated and glued itself to the skin. Fry it straight after dredging, and the coating slides off into the fat and leaves you bald chicken. The fat had to stay steady. Too cool and it soaked. Too hot and the outside burned raw. Fried chicken was Sunday itself. The next entry cooked while everyone was at church. 3. Pot roast. A tough cut browned hard. then covered and cooked low for hours with onions and carrots until it shreds. It needed no attention. You put it in and you left. It cooked itself while the house was empty. Come home from church and dinner had made itself. That was the arrangement. The cut was the cheapest in the case, full of connective tissue, and that tissue is the point. Cook it fast and it is inedible. Cook it 3 hours and the collagen melts and the meat falls apart. The same tissue that makes it tough is what makes it tender. There is no substitute. The vegetables went in late, not at the start, or they turned to mush and disappeared. The liquid never covered the meat. Halfway up, no further, so the top roasted while the bottom braised. Pot roast was patience rewarded. The next entry wore a crown of pineapple. 2. Baked ham with pineapple. A whole ham scored in diamonds, studded with cloves, covered in pineapple rings, glazed and baked. It is at number 2 because it was the centerpiece. Easter, Christmas, the table with the good cloth. Every other dish on that table existed to sit next to this one. The scoring was not decoration. Those cuts let the glaze reach into the fat instead of sliding off. The cloves went in where the lines crossed, 1 per diamond, and they perfumed the fat as it rendered. They also pinned the pineapple rings down, and a toothpick held each cherry in the center hole. The glaze went on late in the last 30 minutes, and it went on in 3 or 4 coats. Brush it on at the start, and the sugar burns black long before the ham is warmed through. The ham was the crown of the table, and a grandmother made it. Number 1, she did not. 1. Green bean casserole. Green beans, a can of cream of mushroom soup, fried onions from a can, 10 minutes of work. It is the most served side dish in America, and it sits on 20 million tables every Thanksgiving. And it was never a grandmother's recipe. It was created in 1955 by a woman named Dorcas Riley. She worked in the home economics department at the Campbell Soup Company in Camden, New Jersey. An Associated Press reporter had asked the company for a vegetable side made from things people already had. Riley and her team tested it and called it green bean bake. Then Campbell's printed it on the soup can. So every grandmother who made this learned it from a label. 40% of that soup now ends up in this one dish. In 2002,